What was the craziest moment that you came across?
Maybe multiple times a day we'd call each other and just be like, you will never ever believe what I just heard. There's a scene of Goldman Sachs bankers jumping in an ice bath to try to convince Adam Neumann to take their debt deal rather than JP Morgan.
Was it the ice bath at his house or next to his office?
Everywhere.
All of the above.
You're caught in a bit of a fire festival situation here because there was the WeWork documentary, and now there's the WeWork book. For somebody who's looking at this and says, well, I just watched the WeWork documentary, why am I going to read the Cult of We book? What's your pitch to that person?
Now, that's a great question. It's a great starter question. We've got so much more that you've never heard before and you didn't see before when you watched the documentary. We found a lot of new crazy details that kind of made our jaws drop about Adam, about his wife.
Yeah, a bunch of people after the Hulu doc asked me, like, well, I don't get it. It didn't really communicate, like, why all these investors fell for this. Were they idiots? And, like, no, like, we actually found out they were really smart people, but doing really dumb things, which is, like, you know, giving billions of dollars to something that wasn't at all a tech company, but they thought it was.
There's so many anecdotes in this book. What was the craziest moment that you came across in your reporting?
There was a moment, I would say, like, you know, once a day at times, maybe multiple times a day, we'd call each other and just be like, you will never, ever believe what I just heard. There's a scene of Goldman Sachs bankers jumping in an ice bath to try to convince Adam Neumann to take their debt deal rather than JP Morgan's. It's like, how does everything get turned into like a frat scene?
Eliot, how about you?
So in the absolute sort of the peak of Rome before it all crumbled, which was like 2018, he's negotiating this deal with Massasohn from SoftBank. And, you know, WeWork at this time has like $1 billion of revenue plus, and they're mapping out this plan for WeWork to become a $10 trillion company, which, by the way, the entire U.S. stock market was valued at $30 trillion at the time. So it's like, well, you know, we'll just like extend the graph up a little bit, and you know, it'll just be the most valuable company on earth by 30-fold.
Yeah, there's a lot of casual chart drawing throughout the book. It seems that a lot of negotiations are either just written like in a car ride, or, I mean, I know that's where Massasohn and Adam Neumann at first had like their big agreement, right? That they were going to work together. It was in the back of a car while he was visiting for 15 minutes.
On the way to Trump Tower, because Massa was like due at Trump Tower with the president-elect.
While Adam Neumann drove WeWork, who really is to blame for the whole WeWork situation?
It's not just his fault. I mean, that's why we have checks and balances in theory in capitalism. I mean, there's boards of directors, there's bankers who are advising him. There were so many checks that should have been there. And I mean, granted, Adam, he pushed the envelope in ways that probably other people wouldn't have thought to take out so much money from the company. Some of the most sophisticated financiers, investors in the whole world were not just watching him, they were sort of saying, sure, you know, maybe we don't like it, but we're not going to push back. So
yeah, these investors you'd hear, it's like, well, they grumbled. They're like, oh, we don't like how Adam's buying a jet. We don't like how he's buying a wave pool company. We don't like how he's starting an elementary school for our co-working company with our money. But then the board meetings are like, they have them, and then they all vote in favor.
Or he doesn't show up at the board meetings, which shows how much he cared.
You rattled off a wave pool, a brand new school. Was it ever difficult for both of you to keep track of all of this?
It was a Google sheet with many tabs, and we got lost in the tabs, and then we also started lots of other sheets that got lost. I mean, we just find these anecdotes. It's like they invested in 2 coffee creamer companies.
They invested in millions of dollars in 2 different types of energy-boosting coffee creamer, sustainable coffee creamer.
So, like, they announced that Adam gave money to Laird Hamilton's coffee creamer company, and then Adam also talked about how he had, like, become friends and been surfing with Laird Hamilton in Hawaii on an 18-foot wave, which, by the way, no way. So then you just sort of, like, look at the timing together, and it's like, wow, so he gives him $25 million out of this fund that was only supposed to be writing, like, $1 and $3 million checks. And then you, like, look, and you're like, oh, there's this other coffee creamer company from these guys who were on Shark Tank. who rented in WeWork and were three brothers who kind of looked the same. It was weird.
Yeah.
It's like SoftBank got this list of stuff that Adam had invested in with their money, and there are two coffee creamer companies, and like, why did they give Ashton Kutcher's VC firm $20 million plus? We have this thing where they didn't do this, but they talked about, Adam talked about buying Lyft. He talked about buying Sweetgreen. He and his deputy talked about buying the Wu-Tang album that's really rare and esoteric.
Martin Shkreli's Wu-Tang album, right. One really interesting thing about this book is that you're reading it and you're reminded, oh, this happened 2 years ago. This is 2019, like 2019 where I just was 2019. But do you think we're still going to learn things about WeWork in the years to come? I mean, I know it's still a company, but about the whole stretch that it just went through?
I think we did have a question of whether we were going to see like more pure fraud, like if there was going to be evidence of something really, some crazy bombshell. I don't feel like there was something giant that we missed in terms of like a fraudulent activity, which is almost crazier.
We often sort of get asked about how's it like Theranos, and Theranos was like a fraud where you had unsophisticated investors getting diluted by someone lying to them. But this is where sophisticated investors just ended up, essentially seeing facts in a different way. You or I might look at something and be like, that's a real estate company. But Adam managed to convince, Jack Ma, Steve Cohen, Harvard, et cetera, that like, no, it's a disruptive tech company, even though they were like looking at the same facts that you or I could.
We rip on Adam Neumann because we're like, oh, WeWork collapsed and it completely failed, but also regular people can't do what he did. So what was Adam Neumann good at, and what do you think WeWork's strengths were?
I think that is part of the tragedy of this whole story. He was the most master salesman. Building this global company, there was something amazing about that. And I do think it's sad. It's like, what if those guardrails existed? What if people were strong enough to stand up to him? Could have he been channeled? A bunch of people say, there will be a second act and it will be crazier than the first with Adam Neumann.
Does that follow up from the, quite honestly, legendary picture that's in the book of him walking barefoot? I think it's outside of Pete's Tavern, right?
Yes, right outside of Pete's Tavern.
That's like at the end of the Marvel movie where they have a little scene after the credits that leads into the next movie. That's what that picture was. Thank you both for giving at least sufficient explanation as to who Miguel McKelvey is or what his role was. What did you find out about McKelvey's role in all of this?
A lot of the key true like innovations of WeWork were around architecture, and like some of those, he was an architect. He had some of those ideas of sort of making glass spaces and letting the light stream in. Miguel was, just almost didn't want to get in Adam's way. I mean, he seemed by many, many accounts to be just like a really nice guy who meant well, but, didn't want to stand up or push back too much against some of the things that Adam did.
Eliot, I want to bring up a story that you wrote, which is, I think, one of the first WeWork stories that you wrote for the Journal. You talk about how WeWork is being described as a tech company. And this is an actual quote from the article. It says, viewed as a traditional real estate venture, WeWork's valuation won't be nearly as rich, Mr. Neumann acknowledges. So you were there from the beginning.
Called it.
In Adam Neumann's own words here, he says that we probably won't reach a crazy valuation. You watched it grow. At what point did it seem like this was the breaking point for WeWork?
Every day. So like I started covering them in 2013. That's when I first came upon Adam. I didn't write anything that year. But then like the story became when I found out the valuation, which they only had a few locations at the time and they were worth $1.5 billion. And it's like, well, I know what a building is worth. I know what real estate looks like. This is like buildings are much bigger than that, and the landlord owns the building, and it's worth that's how you get $1.5 billion, and you have like this really tiny amount of lease space, and that makes no sense to me. So every time I thought we'd write a story that would be like, okay, let's just lay out there that all of their money comes from real estate, that what the business model is, people will see it, and then every time I do that, they'd raise more money at a higher valuation, and more people would say they're like an AI company or a tech company, and it would just sort of be like, what is going on in the world?
Have we learned anything from the story of WeWork? Because again, I mean, you connect it to things like Enron, Theranos, Beanie Babies, Tulips. Do you think this story will teach anybody anything?
Hard no. We actually initially thought that Silicon Valley was absorbing lessons from this, and I think there was one of the main early takeaways seemed to be like, wow, founders have too much control, and like maybe if you're just giving these like 28-year-olds who have messianic visions billions of dollars and full control of the company, like something like this might happen. Like who'd think? But then the pandemic happened, and like weird things happened with the stock market, and we've gone the other direction. And so if you look at a lot of the companies that have gone public recently, a lot of the companies coming through SPACs, like actually some of these founders are getting more control. They're getting more compensation, presumably as a result. Like, I mean, there's really huge compensation packages at Palantir, DoorDash, Airbnb. The DD founders just gave themselves a huge amount of money. I mean, it's like this is what happens when you have founders who have sort of messianic qualities.
If you wanted your readers to have one takeaway from this book, what would it be?
Just like the system it created this. Adam Neumann was a vessel for that. He happened to be a really fun leader for that, but it's sort of the incentives in the financial system are what led to this.
And I would just say that you see certain names, and you think with their backing there must be something so much deeper that's gone on. There's like a Goldman Sachs, a JP Morgan, a Fidelity, one of the biggest mutual funds in the world, backing something. It's got to be legit. There can't be any questions around it. And maybe that's not true.
Hey, this is Dan Toomey. Thank you so much for watching our video. If you like it, go ahead and toss us a like. And also, don't forget to subscribe to the Morning Brew YouTube channel if you want to see more videos like this. Also, don't forget to sign up for the Morning Brew daily newsletter, which is a free newsletter that comes in your inbox every morning and gives you everything you need to know about the world of business and finance and tech. It's a great newsletter. I sign up for it, so you should too. We'll put a link to it somewhere in our description. All right, thanks for watching.